Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL week number 3 overview and analysis video in the spring split. Another big one coming at you, so I really do not want to waste too much time at the start here with any sort of intro. I hope you guys are excited. I know I am, of course, so many Group Ascend games to cover, but still some Group Nirvana to cover as well, and definitely some interesting series to talk about that I might go a little less in-depth than normal because I casted them, and I'll be calling that out as we continue to go along. But if you're excited, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect to happen this week? Were there any upsets, any surprises, any players playing better or worse than you anticipated? Always curious to know your thoughts and opinions down there. But without further ado, let's get into the content itself, shall we? If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 16 here in the LPL, of course, including both Group Ascend and Group Nirvana teams. I don't think every Group Ascend team is better than every Group Nirvana team, spoiler alert, as I think most people would kind of agree on right now, and especially when it comes to the play-ins, that's going to be very, very important, so, keep that in mind for the end of the video, but most of today will be spent talking about the series that we got in Week 3, so, without further ado, let's jump into it. Of course, a quick announcement at the start here. I did cast a couple of series over the course of this past week, 3 of them to be precise, which will be called out when we talk about them here, just because I'm going to spend a little bit less time on them. If you want my full breakdown, go watch those games. The link to the LPL English YouTube and Twitch is going to be down in the description. You can go ahead and check those out. Obviously, those will be linked with an asterisk in the video on the visuals themselves, so you can know which series I am talking about. I'll bring it up when we talk about them as well, but that's not the last time I will be casting for LPL English. We have one more coming up, at the very least, for the next split. It's going to be on the night of the 1st or the morning of the 2nd, however you want to say that if you are here in the United States. It's going to be the 2 series, OMG versus RNG, and then Bilibili versus Weibo Gaming. I will be on cast for that, so if you're interested in seeing my thoughts live or just generally want to tune in to the LPL, it really would mean a lot if you checked out those series later on at the end of Week 4, but that's the announcement out of the way. Of course, the links to that will be in the description. Let's go ahead and get into week number 1 and our actual review of the games that happened this past weekend, starting, of course, with day number 1, and we kicked it off with a Group Nirvana series, maybe a bit out of regular there, and it's a matchup between RNG and Ultra Prime that kicked off week number 3, the first day here, and Ultra Prime is going to be able to pick up the 2-1 series win. This is a really nice win for Ultra Prime. Again, this should be the best team right now in Group Nirvana. I'm not sure that they are on paper, but in terms of the production that they've had over the course of this year, they've certainly been the closest team to being able to be in Group Ascend. They probably should be in Group Ascend if they didn't choke things away against WE in that final series that they played in the play-in series. Like, they would be there. And so Ultra Prime definitely coming in with a lot of confidence and a lot of expectations, and they lived up to that here in this series. And then for RNG on the other side, this team just has so much going wrong with them at the current moment. This team is not living up to any sort of preseason expectations. I was already much lower on RNG than most people were. I think I had them 13th or so in my preseason power rankings. They've lived up to that. They've basically been a bottom 3, bottom 4 team in the LPL, but I think a lot of people expected more with Milky Way coming back to this team, even someone like Xiaoshu in the top lane, and it's really not ended up working out for them. So far, they're a contender for a bottom 2 team that might not even make it to the summer split, and for an org as established and, historical, quite frankly, as RNG is, that is just a major disappointment. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Of course, player of the series for me is going to go to Junhao in the jungle. He has been really good for Ultra Prime in their wins across this split. He doesn't always have the most consistent games. He's going to have some bad games every once in a while. He's really not going to play well if he has to play from behind, but when you do give him something that can skirmish early, specifically something that can carry, he can do really well on those picks. The Lee Sin in game 2, the Skarner in game number 3, both were really nice for him, specifically that Lee Sin game where it felt like he was controlling a lot of the tempo in the early game. Really impressed with how he ended up playing that, but again, I think this team lives and dies by Junhao, and that's really funny because he wasn't very good in split 1 in the winter split. It's really nice to see him start to find his footing. Of course, I think Xiaoxia coming into the support position definitely helped out with that. Of course, his LDL support for many years. So I'm excited to see Junhao, really get comfortable at this level and go up against somebody in Milky Way who definitely had a lot more hype, a lot more expectation than maybe Junhao did coming into the year and just perform incredibly well. I also want to point out, of course, Zhang in game number 3 on the Yorick. They had no answer to Yorick. Yorick's actually becoming a little bit more of a common, popular pick here in the LPL. It's no longer a 1 or a 2 off kind of thing. We're seeing it much more regularly than we're seeing even other picks in this series, like the Aphelios, and that's very funny to talk about because Yorick just kind of makes pro very interesting to watch, but with no lane swaps, it's really hard to take York out of the game at the current moment, to get him behind on resources, because it's just really easy for him to play safe and passive in the early game and not really be punishable. And that's exactly what Jiang did, and then eventually he was able to take over the game. I really like Jiang. I think he has a lot of upside. He hasn't shown that in the LPL, but when you go back to his tape from last year in the PCS, there is a ton to like about him as a player. So I'm hopeful that this is the start of maybe some progression. I'm not going to like fully force that narrative because I do think there is still a long way to go, but this was a good showing. Wako is starting to play better. I don't think he was very good at the start of the year. In fact, I think he was just like a slightly below average AD carry, not really doing a ton to harm his team, but certainly not doing a ton to push them forward. But it does feel like he's starting to click a little bit better. Saber, I think, continues to be much better on roamers, and we saw that in this series. Not only the Galio in game 1, where he was fine, generally speaking, but the Rise and the Talia, this is where you want Saber at this point. He came up as a mid lane assassin player, but he has looked a ton better when he can get out on the map and move around, and I think this kind of showed that off. And again, Xiaoxia has been an upgrade in the support position. Rosie Love was fine, but Xiaoxia definitely has better synergy with Junhao, and at the end of the day, that's what really matters. So nice win for Ultra Prime and a bad loss here for RNG. There is two really easy choices here for dud of the series, and you just got to pick one of them. It's either got to be Milky Way or Niket. Both of them were really not good for this team. I'm giving it to Niket down in the support position, if only just because of that Rakan game, which was absolutely brutal in game number 3. I'm already not a fan at all of Aphelios. I get that Jiachi is much better on these hyper carries. We've seen the Kaisa really be the primary option for RNG throughout basically the entirety of Split 2 here, the Spring Split. But once he's off of Jin and Ezreal and these safer AD carries, you have to put him on something that can carry. He's really not that great in that role, and, you know, Aphelios is obviously a champion that I just don't feel very strongly about, and Niket really was forcing the issue. He was running into a lot of danger, had no follow-up coming in from his AD carry or his jungler, and it just really became a problem, just overextended, a bad series from him. And this is a player that, you know, looked good last year on Ultra Prime, and it's really frustrating to see him kind of fall back down to earth. But Milky Way is the other player that you have to consider for dud of the series here. He got completely out-jungled by Junhao, and a lot of people are talking about how it's his mental that has kind of been ruined and that he's not really trying anymore, and that's why he's struggling a bit more. I have taken the flip side approach to that when I've talked about Milky Way this year. I think this is him just crashing back down to earth in terms of what his playstyle is. The player I've always compared him to is Bo. I think they're incredibly similar as junglers, in which they're very greedy players that if they can play from a gigantic lead can win harder than almost any other jungler. You're going to see more 15 kill games from players like Milky Way and Bo than you will from even like Kanavi and Tarzan, like the top tier junglers, because that's just their style. However, they are very beatable if you take them out of their comfort zone. We see Milky Way being forced onto things like Viego and Wukong, and while those champions are good, they're certainly not exceptional right now. This guy cannot play Maokai, he cannot play Sejuani, he's not going to be a facilitator. That's entirely out of the equation, and if he has losing lanes, he can't do anything in these games. We kind of saw that last year on FPX in the playoffs when he was starting to get taken advantage of more. I don't think this is some sort of 2025 revelation that he has started to be bad. I think he got figured out at the end of 2024 because he is very one-dimensional, and I think unfortunately that's carried over so far into 2025, and so we'll see if that continues. The pathing has just not been good. I think the rest of this team is also not great. Like, Tong Yuan is fine, I guess. I continue to be lower on him, but he's had a couple of good games this split. Jiachi wasn't the problem here, but I also don't think he was the solution. Certainly wasn't as good as Wako on the other side, and Xiaoshu has been wholly disappointing, not only this year, but for most of last year as well. RNG is just not a good team, and they are in real danger of being a bottom 2 team. In fact, I think you could make a real argument that they are a, favorite to be a bottom 2 team and to not go on to summer, which is a disaster. But Ultra Prime looks fine. This should be a team that is contending at the very least for one of those play-in matches, one of those best of 5s to get into the playoffs. I think they've earned it. I think they've been good for most of this year, but they got to keep the momentum up. You can't let, this go to waste. You have to be able to keep your foot on the gas in Group Nirvana because it's single round robin. You can't afford to drop any series, but at least for now, they're looking good at the start. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and we get our first upset here on the first day. It's LGD Gaming taking on FunPlus Phoenix, and FPX is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. Definitely did not see this one coming. It really felt like JDG was finally starting to find their groove at the end of last week, and here it all goes, out the window. They had this series. They had it in the palm of their hand in game number 3, and they threw it away. There is absolutely no excuse for them losing that third and final game. There are a couple of players that I think we could highlight in particular that did not play well here. Some of them expected, some of them not so much, but you do have to give credit to FPX. They played really well here, with the exception of Shadow not being a particularly good smiter. This team is finding its groove in all areas. There were multiple lanes that were just better than their opposition on JD Gaming, certainly some that I did not expect. I didn't think mid lane was going to be nearly as good as it was in this series for FPX. That's kind of the main one. Top lane was obviously better, but I think some people could have predicted that. Sheer has been good this year, and Allah has not, but I gotta give player of the series to Jue. How could you do not give player of the series to Jue for that Game 3 Nico ultimate. It's probably the best Nico ult I've ever seen. It genuinely was exceptionally good, and he had a great series before that as well. He was really important on the Renata in game number 1. He just didn't get enough credit for that game. I think the Nico, though, that's what really secured this player of the series, and Jue has had some highlight moments in the LPL previously. This is a guy who has been successful before. He's just not been consistent, and that's been a real problem. I honestly don't even think he's been all that good so far in 2025. I think he's been fine. He's certainly not been awful, but he's had a couple of up and down games. It's just when it works, when it looks really good, is really going to catch the eyes of people, and I think this was easily the best series he's played so far in 2025. So really nice to see that. Assume, I think, was fine this series. Again, I'm still just not super sold on him as a player. I think he is the weak link of this team right now. Not to say that I think he's bad, just that I don't think he's great. I don't think he's ever going to be able to carry games for you. The Misfortune bullet times were super good, following up on a lot of the CC here. He's just the definition of an average AD carry, in my opinion. He doesn't really do anything exceptionally well, but he's not really all that bad in any particular area either. Care was phenomenal here, and that's really the player I want to point out. I didn't think Care was going to be this good in this series. Scout is a better player than Care in almost every aspect. Care ends up picking the Kassadin in game number 3, but it's really that game 2 on Azir that impressed me. Scout did not get a lot off on the Yone, even in their win. You can obviously look at game number 1, like the Talia versus the Ryze, and you can see a lot more action for Care. Part of that was generated by Shadow, who was really good in that game, but I was just shocked by how good Care was for FPX. Shadow had a great series, was, I would say, better than Shun, even if Shun was particularly effective in this series, especially in game 2 on the Lilia, where I thought he was really good setting up Pays on the Jinx. And then, like I said, Sheer was better on the top side. Kind of everybody on FPX deserving of a shout out. When you pull off an upset like this, it's definitely important. And honestly, this team might be closer to being top 7 than they are to being, bottom 5, which I think was not my expectation going into Group Ascend. But for JDG, this is just such a bad time to have a loss like this. I get that it's kind of a circle of suck right now in the LPL, everybody losing to everybody else, but still, you kind of wanted to see something a little bit different out of a team that finally felt like they were putting it together, mostly because last week it felt like the weak links of the team up until that point were really starting to figure it out, notably Ala and Missing, who have just not been good so far in 2025, and unfortunately that returned here in this series against FPX. Ala is very easily my dud of the series. He didn't do anything. I don't even think you can really point out a single play that he made that was positive overall for JDG. I just really was not impressed, and he has been a massive downgrade both to Sheer and Flandre from what they were last year, and that's just not what I expected. They expected to upgrade pretty heavily in this position, and Ole was better than both of them last year, but as we can see in this matchup, when Sheer is just outperforming you on the other side, that is a really, really bad signal, because Sheer was their upside addition last year, and right now it doesn't even look like Ole is better in the moment, which is a disaster. I want to point out Scout, though. He has to be better than this, and for the most part, he has been. I continue to think that Scout gets a bad reputation because this team doesn't play for him really all that much. Pays is definitely the main character on JD Gaming, but Scout has been good for most of this year. His lane stats are solid, and he has been really nice in teamfights. The problem for Scout is just, it comes at the bad moments, and, when he doesn't play well, it gets a little bit exacerbated because it's in games like this against FPX where he absolutely should be dominating, but this was, simply put, not good enough. He was not very good. I would argue he was the worst mid laner in all 3 games across this series, which is, again, just not good enough. I think Shun and Pays were fine. They were definitely the strengths of this team. Shun was really important in game 2. Pays obviously very important in game 2 on the Jinx, and Pays has been awesome. I still think he's the best AD carry in the LPL. Him and Missing don't have any chemistry whatsoever. It just doesn't matter. Pays is good enough to be able to generate things outside of that. Missing got outplayed, especially in the back half by Jue, especially when they were both on playmakers, but it is what it is. I don't think he had a horrendous series. It's just one of those where FPX had the better big plays. They had game number 3 in their hands. Shun was in a good spot. Pays was in a good spot on the Jhin, and they just did nothing with it, and that's going to be on them. They should have been able to walk out of this series with the win, not only in terms of expectations, but in terms of what happened on the Rift, and that just wasn't what happened, and credit to FPX for being able to pick that up. Again, I'm happy to see that this team has more than earned their spot here in Group Ascend. It really does feel, instead of like a top 7 in the LPL like we've been talking about it all year long, it's more of a top 9, which is much more fun, but it also means that there's a lot more volatility, and FPX has certainly introduced that to Group Ascend. Then moving on to day number 2, and this is the day I was telling you guys about that I did personally cast, and so I'm going to be going over this a little bit quicker than I have some of the other series. Starting off, day number 2 was a matchup between Anyone's Legend and Thunder Talk. Again, you can see if I have or have not casted a game down at the bottom with the asterisk, but because I casted both of these, you can get my live reactions in the VODs in the link below, of course, to those channels. But I will quickly talk about AL absolutely decimating Thunder Talk. This series was not close at any point. Neither of these teams felt like this was was ever going to go any other way other than AL absolutely blistering them, and it happened in every single possible way. It was all 5 members of AL just completely popping off, being better than their opposition, and really kind of beating them in every facet, including draft, where I think they got some massive advantages. But player of the series to me is going to go to Tarzan in the jungle. It felt like he was the one that was creating the most for the team, although if you wanted to give this to Hope in the bot lane, I totally understand. In fact, I made a pretty strong pitch for Hope to be player of the game in game number 2 on the broadcast itself. But Tarzan, I think when you look across this entire series, was definitely the one, like, main character here for AL, as he almost always is. He hugely majorly outjungled Beishwan on the other side, and anybody who watches the channel knows that Thunder Talk really runs through Beishwan. When he's winning, this team is fine. When he's losing, this team is just, like, not in a spot where they can win games. Everything they do bounces off the pressure and the tempo that he's able to generate in the jungle, and he was bad in this series, specifically in that game number 2 on the Brand, where almost every single play he went for did not work. I really hate the draft in game 2. Brand and Talia as a duo, I think, is just way too risky. You're indexing so heavily into generating a lead early against a team like AL who's better than you in every single laning phase, and so I just didn't like that idea, and Tarzan took advantage of it. He popped off on the Neferi in game number 1. That was definitely his more carry-oriented game, and then the Skarner as more of a setup piece in game 2. He just does everything. I made the claim on that broadcast that Tarzan is the best jungler in the world, and I will continue to stick by that. I think isolated from the rest of their teams, I would take Tarzan over any other jungler in the world right now. But again, Hope was in that consideration for me. He dominated on the Varus in game number 2, consistent damage being output from him. He is pretty consistently like my second choice for player of the series in almost every single game that AL end up playing, but I love the way that he played this series, and I think he's not going to get enough credit for how well he played that game number 1 on the Corki. I think he was really important towards their damage profile, but it really was the Varus in game 2 that he popped off on. Shanks ends up getting multiple solo kills in over Satab. We'll talk about Satab on the other side of this, but Shanks popped off and looked awesome. I think he's playing better now than he did at the beginning of the year, which is kind of the opposite of what typically happens with Shanks, so that's a good sign. Fondre and Kale were really good as well. I'm certainly not trying to disparage them or put them down by not mentioning them, but again, if you want my full thoughts on the series and on AL's win, check that out there. And then for Thunder Talk, this team is bad. Like, outlook-wise, this team is just not good enough to be considered in that upper echelon. They are around where FPX is right now. In fact, I think there is a case to be made that they are basically what FPX is, and that is a frustrating place to be. I know they beat FPX already here in Group Ascend. They're going to get a chance to reprove that later on, but they have not looked good at all against even remotely competent teams. Teams that know what they're supposed to be doing, they just completely fall flat in terms of their ability to play the map, and I think a lot of that just comes from them not having functioning solo laners. Hoya and Satab are both borderline bottom 1 or bottom 2 players in their roles in the LPL. They are unplayable at the current moment. Satab, we kind of knew that. You know, we saw that in the playoffs last split when he was taking on Knight and got absolutely obliterated in that rematch once Knight started to take it seriously. Hoya felt like he was starting to figure something out, but it turns out lane swaps will do a ton for you, so him now being left on an island to actually have to lane against Fondra and being able to pull a lot of resources in from Tarzan is just not good for Thunder Talk overall. Though their solo laners are unplayable at a Group Ascend level. They're barely playable at an LPL level. I think Feather was also really bad in this series, especially in game 1 on the Seraphine, where I think things went pretty terribly wrong for him. This was just not a good series overall. 1xN was never as useful as Hope. In fact, there were multiple times where he just did not ult in game 2 on Misfortune in situations where it felt like he needed to. Beishwan was getting completely out-jungled. He tried in game 1 and completely gave up in game 2. This was a bad loss for Thunder Talk. Nothing good to take away here. They got pummeled, and for AL, they pummeled them. This was everything you wanted to see and then some out of AL, and once again, I think it's pretty clear that this is, at worst, a top 2 team in terms of power rankings right now in the LPL. It's all just about whether or not they can overcome their top esports demons and get to number 1. Then moving on to our second series of day 2, and once again, ended up casting this one, and this one was a banger. It was Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on Invictus Gaming, and this is really the one where I'm sitting there and saying, yeah, if you want to go get my full thoughts, please check out the cast, because I will not be doing it justice in this small section. This was a banger between these two teams. Every single game was on a knife's edge. I think both teams ended up holding like 2K plus gold leads in all 3 games. It was absurd. The throws, the gold generation, the mistakes, the positive team fights from each of these teams. It was just a really good look for both of them, and I think you can give both of these teams at least some credit. A couple of players on both sides I think played really well, but I do really want to point out Ninjas in Pyjamas, obviously because they won, but because I do think they played better here today, and this could have been a 2-0 after game number 1. They had that game in the palm of their hands and threw it away with a big mistake, and, you know, unfortunately, that's just kind of how things go, but they end up pulling it back here in game number 3 and game 2, I guess, and that's really off the back of Leave, who is the easy choice for player of the series for me. He was the main guy in this series, especially on the Corki in game number 2, took over in terms of the damage he was outputting. Really liked how he played the Jhin in game number 3. I had some concerns about the draft in game 3, but Leave definitely kind of came through and was just straight up better than Gala. I think when you take a look at their performances side by side, Gala was fine in every game that really wasn't game number 2. He was really good on the Varus in game 1 and was kind of good on the Xayah in game number 3, but Leave was exceptional in this series. Definitely the most important player on the map, and I think he's playing better now than he was at the beginning of the year. He's gotten some of that confidence back. This isn't the first time we've seen Leave perform like a top tier AD carry. He did that in his rookie split on Edward Gaming. He just wasn't able to keep up that kind of pressure after all the controversy. It's nice to see that the mechanics are still there, but Aki had a phenomenal series, and if Aki is going to play like this, Ninjas in Pyjamas are a very scary team. One of the problems, I guess I should say really the only problem for NIP over the course of this year is that Doanby and Leave have had to do way too much for this team, that they've really been the two players that have carried them across the finish line and certainly carried them across a lot of the other teams at this level. Shanji and Aki have been the weak links for Ninjas in Pyjamas. Both of them were not only better than their opposition in this series, but Aki in particular was dominant. He was exceptional in game number 1, made some mistakes down the stretch, but was really good on the Lilia in game 2 and was really good on the Maokai in game number 3. Really impressed with that. If Aki's going to be able to get back to that 2023 form, that's the difference between NIP competing for top 4 and not competing for top 4. So again, nice to see that. Doanby was fine, completely sacrificed lane most of these games, but you can live with that. Shanji was very good in this series. Maybe he isn't reflective in the scoreline. PB God had some really bad engages, but some really clutch ones as well on the Rel in particular at the end of game number 2. So I feel good about Ninjas in Pyjamas. Don't feel great because this was an absolute fiesta, but for IG on the other side, I mean, come on, the Shy is dud of the series. He single-handedly sold game number 3. Like, I get that the Nidalee worked last week, and you can kind of point out the big positives of Nidalee top as an answer to York because it can generate gigantic leads, and it did. It got some gigantic leads in the early part of this game, but when you're talking about the last 15 minutes, the Shy, again, single-handedly lost Ninjas in Pyjamas the game. What was he doing out there? He gets caught out not once, but twice, and both of those catches allow NIP to completely take over the map, get some major objectives, and push the game forward. Like, he, again, single-handedly lost it for them. Like, I get that the Nidalee did well early. He's done of the series. He absolutely earned it. He inted his face off in this series. Rookie was really the only one, I think, playing consistently well. And I think, you know, last week we kind of called out that they're kind of simplifying the process for him a bit, putting him back on Orianna and Azir. He's playing much better once he's back on these champions as opposed to a lot of the assassins he was playing earlier on in the split. Let him play Azir and Orianna if that's what he's going to feel the most comfortable on. It clearly is at the moment. He got some big leads, 1v1 in the mid lane. It just didn't amount to anything. You know, Mako had some good moments, but also some really bad moments in the back half of this series. Basically did nothing in pivotal team fights. Jeje was trying, but also was on facilitators the entire series, and he's been their best player. And Aki honestly had more pressure, especially throughout a lot of the mid games. So overall, like Invictus, they put up a fight and they probably could have won this series, but it was super sloppy from them. They didn't look particularly composed, and they threw away these games. They took fights they did not need to take. They had some horrible objective timers. Like, this was just a very I should say uncharacteristic. It's really not uncharacteristic. It is a characteristically sloppy series from Invictus Gaming, and that's just not ideal from them. But for NIP on the other side, this was a good win. This isn't the first time this year they've beaten IG, but I would say that this series is more important, if only because the first time was also very sloppy, but they were probably a bit more composed this time around. Leave looks exceptional, and if Aki's going to be human in that jungle position, things are going to get a lot better, but NIP still have a lot to grow on. Do I think this is a top 4 team? I'm still very questionable of that right now, but we already saw JDG lose to FPX earlier this week. Top 3, top 4 is pretty wide open. Anybody can really take it right now. Moving on now to day number 3, and we take a dip back down to Group Nirvana here as we get LGD taking on LNG in a Group Nirvana matchup, and LGD is going to very dominantly pick up the 2-0 win. LNG just look like they have completely lost the will to fight in a lot of the cases here. Like, this was not close. LGD is not this dominant team that's going to be able to outskill you in every area. They have good players, especially on the top side of the map. Nayu has been a tremendous addition so far to this team. He's been an upgrade in the jungle to a player in Climber who already was LGD's best player going into Group Nirvana, so it's really nice to see that, and once again, we will talk about him moving forward, but, like, they lost everywhere. Saucy was dominant, even with Zika playing well on the top side. Haichao got destroyed by Zhao Qinghua, and that's really a bad sign, and this is one of the worst bot lanes in the LPL in Xiaoya and YCX, and we'll talk about it, man. LP and Zhuo are just bad, like, actually bad. No redeeming quality here for LNG, so, again, we'll get to it, but player of the series for me on LGD is going to go to Nayu in the jungle. jungle. This guy's genuinely really, really good, and I'm super excited to be able to say that because I did say that before last year. I think some people forget how high I was on Rare Adam, or at least I hope people forget how high I was on Rare Adam last year after their Demacia Cup performance. They got top 4 in that tournament, and they were honestly one of the reasons why I was such a big Thunder Talk doubter coming into this year, because Thunder Talk did something very similar where they got a couple of, big upsets at Demacia Cup, and I was like, they're not going to be able to make that work in the LPL. It was kind of true, kind of not. They're definitely not an actually, good team, but they are certainly group ascend worthy. Rare Adam was one of the reasons I got scared, and Nayu was honestly a player that I really believed in at the beginning of last year. It just didn't end up working out in the LPL. I think a lot of his teammates were to blame for that, but nice to see him in a slightly better situation this year than he was last year and actually be able to take over. That Skarner game in Game 1 was gorgeous, and the Olaf game in Game 2 was genuinely unstoppable. We don't really see a lot of jungle Olaf anymore. Not really a pick that I think a lot of people prefer in the jungle at this point, but 5T5 had no answer to it, and again, we'll talk about this for LNG. He is not the answer in the jungle, and we're going to see that later on in the week, but Nayu looking fantastic, definitely looking like the main character here for LGD. It reminds me a ton of when Shadow was on this team, kind of doing similar things, but Nayu has more mechanical upside in my opinion than someone like Shadow does, even if he's not as good of a facilitator. So really like this addition, even if I liked Climber before. So overall, just kind of working. Saucy and Zhao Qinghua were very good in terms of their solo lane duo. Zika was awesome on the other side of this. He continues to be way too good for LNG. It's just unfair that he's stuck on the worst team in the LPL, but Zhao Qinghua has been a disaster, quite frankly, for LGD. I think he's been much more of a negative than he has a positive in the mid lane. To me, he is the worst player on this team at the current moment. Had a great series, completely outplayed Haichao. You can tell the broadcast is a bit done with him as a player, and, obviously we'll get to him when we talk about LNG, but Zhao Qinghua was definitely doing some good things on the Sylas and the Rise. Xiaoya and YCX as a duo, they've not been particularly impressive to me. YCX has made a couple of interesting plays as a support, but Xiaoya is nothing as an AD carry, and yet both of them completely gapped and outplayed their opponents on the other side of this. LNG is a disaster, and LGD, for as questionable as this roster looks on paper, might be one of, if not the best team in Group Nirvana. There is a strong case to be made that that is true right now. They are dominant in their wins. Nayu looks fantastic in the jungle and could actually be a pretty big pickup for them. Excited to see where they go. This could be another time where LGD shocks the world and quietly sneaks top 10 into playoffs, and, maybe gets a matchup if they win Group Nirvana with somebody like WE. Like, they can win a best of 5 against WE to get in there. So I'd be interested to see what happens moving forward, but for LNG on the other side of this, there are some pluses and minuses, definitely, in terms of how things ended up happening for this team here. We can get the pluses out of the way pretty quickly, because it's just Zika on the top side. This guy's really good. The Rumble, the Scion, he's very active on the map. He should be playing for an upper tier group ascend type of team. Quite frankly, if I'm Ninjas in Pyjamas or a team like that that needs a top laner that can be a bit more consistent, and LNG is going to be out for the year starting very shortly, I'd be making some phone calls. I definitely would be considering, but for now, it's just kind of him stuck on a roster that clearly isn't good enough to be playing in the LPL. Haichao has some moments. He had a really nice Azir ultimate in game number 1, even though they ended up losing that game, and I think generally he was fine, but if Zhao Qinghua is gapping you in the mid lane, maybe not gapping, that's not necessarily fair. If Zhao Qinghua is just gaining advantages against you in the mid lane, that is a really bad place to be. Haichao was a breakout star for LGD last year, and it's sad that he's not been able to match that in terms of his performances. Zhuo also is fine, I guess, in the support position. I think his scoreline's probably better than the gameplay he had, but he was also playing with an AD carry who was determined to lose this game, and so it just is what it is. But their new additions to try and salvage their season of 5T5 and LP have been awful. Like, they've somehow been downgrades. Weiwei and Photic were already tremendously bad for this team, like actively bringing them down and holding them back, and I just don't think that that has even gotten any better with these new additions. 5T5 doesn't look like he's capable of playing against even a close to LPL caliber jungler. He just gets out-tempoed by everything, and it doesn't feel like he can even play facilitators. So what are we doing? Like, what's even the point of having him? You've got to find another jungler. And then LP down in the bot lane, who is going to get my dud of the series. Again, I think he was determined to lose these 2 games because he was actively positioning as if his life had no value and no meaning. Like, honestly, get this guy a wellness check because he was willing to kill himself on the Rift over and over and over again. I do not know what was going on. It was just a horrible, horrible series from him and from LNG in general. This team is bad. They have earned that number 16 spot. We'll see what happens later on in the week, but for now, this is garbage. And then for LGD on the other side, it's a nice win, but it's not exactly like you're lighting the world on fire. I'm happy to see Nayu perform well. He could be the best jungler in Group Nirvana. That is a super real possibility. He's always had that kind of upside. I worry about the rest of this team when going up against talent that knows what they're doing, but there's not a lot of those teams in Group Nirvana, and these are the kinds of wins you need to have in order to guarantee that you're not going to be bottom 2. I feel confident in that at this point, but LGD's, upside and their sights now, might be pointed higher than that. They might be pointed on trying to make the playoffs. And quite frankly, I think it's possible depending on who they draw in round number 1. So for now, at least an okay to a decent look from LGD. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and man, things don't get any less funny, even if we're not getting a full upset here, as we see Team WE taking on Top Esports, and Top Esports is going to walk out with the 2-1 win, but man, this was close, and man, did it have no right being as close as it was. It's Top Esports, a team that has dominated domestically in the LPL, only really dropped games and series to teams that are really good at this level, and has pretty consistently looked like the best team in the LPL throughout 2025. It's them versus WE, who I think have the funniest roster in the entire league, who have really broken out and made Group Ascend off the back of a really nice jungle change with Monkey coming in and some step-up moments coming in from Tyun and Vampire at specific times for WE, even if they haven't been consistent at all in the bot lane. It's that group taking a game off of Top Esports and almost taking 2. There is a real shot that walking out of this series, we saw a 2-0 from WE. If they were just a little bit more clinical in that second game, alas, that was not meant to be the case. Top Esports is going to be the team to walk out of here with a win, but it was too close for comfort. So let's talk about why it was close. First off, the players that I want to praise, 369 and Jackie Love, who I think both had really great series. 369 is going to get player of the series for me. Not only was the Jace the most important piece in actually pulling back game number 2, just the sheer raw amount of damage that he can do, rolling 9 in terms of the aggressiveness and his willingness to play on the backline. It was really good stuff from him. He basically had a perfect game on the Jace, but he also was super important on the Gnar to be able to create opportunities in game 3. Now, creating opportunities is all nice, but they don't really have a ton of damage in game 3, so you have to make sure that the lockdown is consistent, and 369's frontlining, I think, was also very important in that game. So great stuff from him. He was the easy choice for player of the series for me, although I did consider Jackie Love, if only because those arrows were point and click in game number 3. I don't think he missed a single arrow, and a lot of them were high difficulty and quite frankly high impact. Jackie Love was definitely player of the game in game number 3 for what he could set up and then the damage he could do afterwards. This was the kind of performance you needed to have if you were Jackie Love. This is with Vampire completely popping off on the other side, and I'm excited to have the Vampire conversation here, but Jackie Love was exceptional. 369 was really good. They're the players you can really point out. Everybody else had some moments, we'll say, for Top Esports. Even Jackie Love had some moments earlier on in the series. 369, I think, was just generally good throughout a lot of these games, or, throughout all 3 of these games. But Kanavi, Cream, and Crisp, they're the 3 where it's like, I wanted to see a bit more. The creation in game 3 from Kanavi was totally fine. I think he didn't have the best early game of all time, but he did totally, well enough in the back half of game number 3. It was game 2 and game 1 that I was really like, hey, Kanavi, you in there? You wake up today? Did someone forget to set your alarm and the coach had to play for you? Because it didn't really feel like him. Losing in the early game is not something that Kanavi does even against the best junglers in the world. Even when he's playing bad, he usually has a lead in the early game. He just doesn't do a ton with it in the mid game. He can get a bit lazy at times. That was not what was happening here. He was just getting out jungled early on, which was very strange. Monkey had a great game 1 on the Skarner, and I wish we saw more of that, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Cream was actually not good at all in game number 1. In fact, I would argue he was dud of the game in that first game on the Yone. Really, really garbage stuff. Crisp, I think, had some really good moments and some really bad moments. I wouldn't let the KDA fool you. There were more good than bad moments in this series for me when it came to Crisp, but still, not a clean series from Top Esports, and it's this circle of suck that continues to expand in the LPL, where it just doesn't feel like anybody at the top of the standings can just be good. They all have to have moments where they look bad. It makes it interesting. It makes it interesting from a game-to-game perspective, but Top Esports needed to come in and dominate this, and they absolutely did not. And then for WE on the other side, like, dud of the series is Karis. I didn't have to think about this. If they had had a different mid laner here, I think that there is a real chance that they win this series. I think Karis is just unplayable at the LPL level. He is probably the single worst player in the LPL, and there's some pretty hefty competition for that at the moment, but he has been horrible in the spring split. He was okay at times in winter. There were a couple of games where it was like, I can kind of see the vision, but it's all fallen apart, and that's with his jungler playing better. Now, Monkey did not have the best back end of this series on the Xin Zhao and the Nefiri, especially in comparison to that game 1, but that game 1 was gorgeous from him on the Skarner, and he still is the best player on WE, but how do I not talk about Vampire? I mean, truly, how do I not bring up Vampire? Easily the best series he's ever played at the LPL level. I don't even think it's close. I'm a certified Vampire hater, and I'm going to stick to that. I don't think this changes my opinion on who Vampire is as a player. The dude has flashes, but the flashes really came together in this series. If this is how he starts playing, regardless of what happens with the rest of this team, regardless of how consistent they are at winning games, I'm going to change my mind on Vampire. I'm certainly going to change my opinion. So really nice stuff from him. Tyun was fine, I think, generally speaking. I didn't love him on the Ziggs in game 3, but it is what it is. Cube was not as good as 369, but you're not expected to be. They needed to win through jungle and through mid. Unfortunately, that's where they got let down. But Top Esports walking out of this by the skin of their own teeth. Just a abysmal showing from them, even with the win. They're going to be obviously glad they didn't lose this series, but dropping a game and almost dropping 2 against WE is not ideal. The only hope is that in the LPL, there are so many games and so many days that sometimes you can overlook an opponent, especially in this double round robin structure, that Top Esports just wasn't all that prepared or all that, riled up to go and play WE today. I think that's really the only hope, and until the foreseeable future, I'm going to imagine that that's what it is, but this does affect my opinion of this team, and I'm going to need to see them be especially dominant their next time out to really make up for this. Then moving on now to day number 4, kind of our middle day of the week, as I like to call it in the LPL, before we start getting into some weekend action. We started it off with a matchup between Bilibili Gaming and WE, who gets the back-to-back honor, and Bilibili is going to pick up the victory here once again in a 2-1, WE picking up another game off of a team that they really have no business beating in any capacity. However, I do think there is a difference between their win over Top Esports and their win over Bilibili in game number 2. Their win over TES in game 1 was really solid, like they really controlled that game. They looked great, and they looked pretty great throughout the rest of that series as well. It felt like it was a close series. That's not really how things went. I think there is definitely a bit of a tonal difference in these two series where, yes, both of them were 2-1s where WE lost, but their losses were clear-cut in this one. They were not close in games 1 and 3. They got trounced in those games, even if they did kind of trounce back in game number 2. So still some positives to take away for WE, but I'll talk about where things went wrong for them. For Bilibili, I honestly think this is a good series overall for them. I know that feels like a weird thing to say, but a couple of really encouraging things for me here when it comes to Bilibili. They have really struggled to find an identity over the course of this year, and that's been their biggest problem. Wei and On cannot play together at a consistent level. That has been proven over and over again against actually good teams, and Wei in general has really just not been able to fit within the confines of this BLG roster, and that has been clear. But Wei deciding, screw it, I'm going to play super aggro. I'm going into WE. Who cares if I play a little bit more risky, if I try to trade 2 for 1 in a couple of instances? That's totally fine against a team like WE because we can outskill them elsewhere. And all of a sudden, BLG look a lot more dynamic in terms of how their game plays. Wei is easily player of the series here for the Sejuani in game 1, and especially the Nefiri in game number 3, which looked excellent from him. Monkey has been a positive for WE, and once again, he was fine in this series. I have no real major issues with how Monkey is playing. He's super greedy and aggro himself, but WE very much need that. They need somebody who's going to play like their life depends on every single moment of the game, and that 1-for-1s are very positive overall because you need to get resources somewhere. But Wei kind of matched that identity, matched that ideology throughout a lot of this series, and it really worked out for him. I just want to see him play more aggressive. That's always been the thing. Wei is super passive and super tempo oriented, which is a problem for BLG because that's not really what they do. They want to play skirmish heavy. They want to try and fight constantly, even if it means sacrificing tempo somewhere on the map. They want to just try and generate these small leads that accumulate into big ones. It's what they did at a super high level last year, and so to see Wei come in and really slow the tempo of this team down has hurt them, and it's the reason they fell all the way to number 5 in my power rankings at the end of last week. But if Wei is going to play more aggressive, if he's going to be more of a resource carry, that's what they felt comfortable doing with Shun last year, and so I think him fitting that role makes a lot of sense, even if I don't think he's better than Shun in that role, even if I do think they still made a mistake in the offseason. But I think people are going to point out that On was running it a bit. I think that there is some truth to that, but I'm really excited to see Bin actually have just a consistently good series across the board. He hasn't had a lot of these. There have been some good and some bad moments, and I get this. I'm a long-time LPL watcher. You don't need to convince me of this, but Bin sometimes just checks out in the regular season. In fact, this was something he was really known for before 2024, where that didn't really happen last year. This team was kind of great from start to finish throughout all of 2024, but you're talking 2023 and before that, even going back to his time on, Suning, when he was talked about as one of the best top laners in the world, kind of rising there, he was never consistent in the regular season. That's kind of what Bin was. It was his MO for a long time, and so he was getting back to that in 2025, but it's nice to see at least one performance where he's just straight up better in every aspect than the top laner he's playing into. I think Knight, Elk, On, they were fine. On was really greedy in this series, and he kind of ran it in game number 2 on the Leona. There were definitely some bad moments there, but I can excuse that because I'd rather him be too greedy than too passive. That's just where I would rather this team sit. Personally, it's certainly found them a lot more success than failure over the past couple of years, and I think kind of indexing more into that strategy, hopefully against more teams than just WE, is a sign of good things to come. But for WE, they beat Bilibili. They won a game against BLG. That's a pretty good sign. Taiyun was incredible in game 2 on the Kai'Sa. Genuinely a star-making performance in game number 2. Now, if he wasn't so horrible in game number 3, perhaps I would take more out of it, but game 3 is one of the worst AD carry games I've seen in a very long time, and it comes right off the back of the best game he has ever played at a tier 1 level. Kind of whiplash there in terms of trying to evaluate him, but dud of the series for me is going to go to Cube on the top side. This was a relatively easy decision. Bin was definitely better than Cube in almost every aspect. Cube has not been good or bad for this team, which I think is a good thing. I kind of came into this year with the expectation that Cube's weak side, dominance was over, that we hadn't really seen that in many years since he was really on Rare Atom. Since he left that team, he had not been a good weak side player, regardless of what a lot of people want to make him out to be, because he just kind of lost the vibes. He started playing a lot more strong side, but he's been a good weak side player for WE, fingers crossed. That being said, Bin is a different challenge, especially Bin on like Ornn, who's just going to be able to play super safe and then be better than you in every single team fight. Like that Renekton was never going to be useful in game 3, but that Rumble was also really bad in game number 1, so Cube kind of gets that pushed over the top there. I considered Vampire for this because he was kind of bad, especially in game 1 on the Rel, where I felt like he was like truly bad, like actually just not so good, but he set up Taiyun so well in game number 2 that I just couldn't get away with doing that. Karis was fine. Monkey was super greedy, super aggressive, but again, I think that that's the right thing to do for WE. I think that's kind of how he has to play, and he did still get a lot over for WE. There were too many positive plays for me to give him dead of the series, and even if Taiyun was by far the worst player in the game in game number 3, it wasn't in consideration. Game number 2 was a tremendously big moment for him as a player. To even know that that's in there is already big enough for me. So WE, 2-4 in their last 6 games, and dropping 2 series 0-2 is not ideal, but it could be a lot worse for them. The fact that they won 2 games against Top Esports and Bilibili is already a huge accomplishment that I think they're going to be happy with. And for BLG, just play more aggressive. Just figure this out. Start finding a playstyle that actually works for your players and index into it. I get that you can get away with it more against WE, but if they don't play like this more often, I'm going to go back to being frustrated with this team, and for now, it's just got to be more of this. Even if it means more negatives, you're going to get more positives in the long run. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it's a real good one. I was really excited for this. It was Weibo Gaming taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas, and Weibo Gaming is going to be able to pick up the 2-1 series win. This team had kind of been in freefall mode the past couple of weeks. Things had really not been going their way, and that's despite, I think, Xiaohu playing some of the best League he's played in a little while. I think Tian has been totally fine. Breathe has been really good for this team. They just couldn't find any sort of consistency. Tian would always kind of disappear in some big moments, and bot lane, I think, had been a bit of a problem for this team, but they are making a change. They're bringing in a new support. Era is going to be starting here in the support position over Hong. Era's been in this organization for what feels like an absolute eternity. They were trying to get this guy to start over Crisp for a long time, and so he's coming in here over Hong. The only thing I'll say about this that I think I disagree with Reddit on is I think if this is something that really hurts Hong's career moving forward, you need to blame this org and not the player, because Hong, it's so funny to see kind of everything that everyone's talking about, because I get it. He's been super inconsistent this year, and quite frankly, he's not been very good in the spring split. I understand why you would want to make a change here, because it doesn't feel like he quite clicks with this team, but the thing about Hong coming into this year is when you looked at all of the top supports, he was the consistent one. He was the one who never really had the down games, who was not very feast or famine. That was what Crisp was. That was what On was. Even Mako would have those feast or famine games. Hong was always the one where it's like, well, you know what you're going to get out of him from a game-to-game basis. Weibo broke Hong. Like, that is absolutely more of the case, in my opinion. This has been consistent with this organization and every support that's played with them, whether it was, Sword Art and then On back in the day, whether it was Crisp the past couple of years, or whether now it's Hong. It's not the player's problem. I'm just going to say that. I think the org broke Hong as a player, and I hope he gets another opportunity somewhere else, because as good as I think Era played in this series, Hong is too good of a player to not be starting in the LPL. I still think he's a top 5 support, but that rant aside, we can talk about this series. Actually, now for Ninjas in Pyjamas on the other side, this is a pretty brutal loss. You had so much momentum coming off of that Invictus Gaming series, and it all kind of got washed away here because the problems just re-emerged. It felt like you didn't have the IG throws to be able to capitalize on in this one, and that's why you ended up losing it, which is an unfortunate turn of circumstance, but again, we'll talk about it. Starting with Weibo, player of the series for me is not going to be the most common choice. For me, it's going to go to Breathe in the top lane. Really felt like he was the most relevant player in this series. The Scion game in game 1 was exceptionally good. Shanji did not have a particularly good series on the other side, although that ultimate from Mbessa in game 3 was really, really nice, and I think his scoreline maybe isn't quite as indicative of how he played. I think Shanji has been better in week 3 than he was in the first 2 weeks, but Breathe has been awesome for Weibo Gaming. The Rumble game in game 3 was exceptionally good, and just generally, I think this guy's been super consistent on the top side, which was kind of a problem for us, and You know, I wanted to say this kind of going into the year, but top lane has changed a lot. With no more lane swaps being allowed, the role of a top laner is very different than it was even just a couple of months ago. 1v1 matters so much more. Your ability to be able to play out those 1v1 matchups is crucial towards your success, and we're seeing a lot of top laners get punished a lot harder than they had previously because they can't hide. They can't play safe in a lot of these circumstances. You need to be able to push your advantage, and Breathe has actually really benefited, I think, from a meta and from a game state where the 1v1s are forced. He's always been a really good 1v1 player, and I think he's getting bigger leads now than he had in the past. The game itself has kind of warped itself to Breed's playstyle, and I think it's really helped the team overall. But in terms of performance, he's probably been the second or third best top laner in the LPL. I would say Flandre has been number one, pretty much for sure, in terms of production, but him and 369, I think, are right there. I would probably take 369's production over his. You know, Bin will get there eventually, he just hasn't been that so far this spring. Like, Breathe has been awesome. He's been really good for this team, and I'm glad to see that continue, even with Shanji, you know, attempting to make some plays, having some good team fights on the other side. I also want to point out Xiaohu. He was the other player I really considered here. He had a really good series. Doenby actually was just not better than him on the other side. I know some people are going to say, oh, well, Doenby sacked lane in order to help out his team, and he made the right decision, and his numbers aren't going to live up to that. I don't think Doenby made phenomenal decisions throughout this series. I think he sacked way too many resources to give it to a player that wasn't going to be able to carry with them in the late game in Aki on this Sejuani. Just felt very weird to sacrifice your game on Orianna to try and play around your facilitative jungle. I just didn't really like those decisions from NIP, but Xiaohu was really good here, especially on the Ahri in Game 3. Arrow was solid. I really liked the way he played Lulu in particular. Now, I think the engage supports definitely have some work to do. That Rel game in Game 2 was not good. I think he had a couple of really bad engages in particular in that game. PP God really outplayed him when he was able to get out on the map and, you know, get moving, but maybe we have to start playing some more hyper carries here for Weibo Gaming. The Zeri Lulu looked great in Game 3. It definitely feels like Era is more comfortable on these enchanters, and so we'll see if that's kind of the direction they want to go in, but I think we're going to need a bigger sample size. People are already talking about Era has been an upgrade or whatever. Hong could absolutely have this series. I need to see more than 3 games out of Era to consider him an upgrade to a player who's been an all-pro support for like 4 years in a row in the LPL. We have to remember who he's replacing. I get that Weibo has kind of tainted the minds of a lot of fans here, but I'm not going to be reactionary like Reddit is. I'm going to sit here and tell you that there is a real shot that Era is not as good as Hong. Now, Tian also had some bad moments. He had some good moments. The Lilia game in Game 1 was really solid from him, but the Maokai in Game 2, not good. The Skarner in Game 3, also not particularly good. There were definitely some moments he needed to improve upon, and quite frankly, he's not been great down the stretch in a lot of these series. He starts off strong and ends a little bit weak, but, you know, I still believe in Tian. I believe in the talent, even if the clutch factor is definitely not there at the moment, but if Breathe is going to play like this, and if Xiaohu is going to continue to be better in spring than he is anywhere else in the year, Weibo's going to be at least a debatably top 6 team, which is what they were here. And then for NIP, again, it's so frustrating to see this coming off of their win over Invictus Gaming because they absolutely needed to do better. Aki's going to get dead of the series regardless of the fact that he led the team in kills. Almost all of those came in game number 1 on the Nefiri, and yet they still lost that game because he doesn't really know how to tempo. I also really hate the draft in game number 1. It puts way too much on Shanji in the top lane to be useful on this Swain, which it's just hard to do, especially going into something like Sion. So Aki gets fed in Game 1, but his Game 2, it was fine. I certainly didn't have major complaints, but it was okay. And then the Sejuani in Game 3, no bueno. Definitely the worst player on the Rift in Game number 3. It was a hyper carry versus hyper carry matchup, except one side had Lulu and the other side had Alistar. That was genuinely kind of the difference here. I really do think that PP God needed to go for some sort of enchanter in that Game number 3, but Aki definitely needed to play better in terms of the tempo, and Doenby sacrificed everything to try to get Aki into a good spot, and it didn't work. It really was frustrating to watch. I think PP God and Shanji were definitely the players that stood out the most in a positive way to me. Leave was there. I don't think it was his fault that they lost this, but also he wasn't really enabled, and so he couldn't take over a lot of these moments. Ninjas and Pyjamas just kind of felt on the back foot. Weibo definitely had more pressure throughout a lot of this series, and NIP felt like the weaker team, and coming off of a chaotic, yes, but good win over a top 4-ish team in Invictus, it's just frustrating to see that this team is not consistent in any facet. We know that that's the case in the LPL, but this is a pretty bad loss, and it's a good win for Weibo to kind of get themselves back on track. They had a miserable week number 2. It's nice to see in these matchups that they can win, that they are able to come out and win it, but again, I need to see Tian play a little bit better, and I need to see a bigger sample size from Era. Once he starts going up against teams that are a little bit more punishing of these enchanters, and especially if he's going to be forced to play more engagers, I just need to see that be more consistent. But for now, this looks okay for Weibo. I hope this is enough to be able to get their confidence back and to be able to get them back in form. But then moving on now to day number 5, and to kick off day 5, we got another little bit of an upset as we saw ThunderTalk Gaming take on Ninjas in Pyjamas, and ThunderTalk is going to be able to pick up the 2-1 series win. I certainly was surprised by this outcome. I was not expecting ThunderTalk to be able to look like this against an NIP team that, yes, is very inconsistent and has not been able to find any sort of like game-to-game consistency at all across this year, even in winter, but especially now, once again, in spring. But also because ThunderTalk really hasn't looked all that good. Let's be honest, this team has not been very strong so far in Group Ascend. They've only beaten FunPlus Phoenix, who I think people would consider to be one of the 2 weaker teams in Group Ascend. And outside of that, they've looked like incompetent against other good teams. It's nice to see them be able to come out here and win a series if the other team is able to underperform. That's really going to be their kind of MO over the course of the rest of the split. It's just kind of hoping that the other teams don't live up to their potential. But what was this from NIP? Because it once again just shows that you cannot get excited about this team. You are not allowed to feel good about Ninjas in Pyjamas at any moment. They have that big win over Invictus earlier this week and then get absolutely pummeled in 2 series that they probably should have won after that. And so it's just frustrating. But talking about ThunderTalk, first and foremost, player of the series for me is going to go to Beishwan in the jungle. I don't think he was the only player here to play well. I think there are 3 to really call out in a big capacity, but the jungle gap in this series was definitely the most notable. And once again, as I've said 100 times over on this channel so far this year, Beishwan is the player that they run everything through. And so when this team is working, when everything is clicking, Beishwan is going to be the one with the most amount of resources, especially on facilitators, things like Sejuani and Skarner. That's when things go right. Now, when he's not playing facilitators or when he is playing facilitators and gets really far behind, like earlier this week, things go terribly wrong, and we've seen that before. But Beishwan is a good player. He's certainly better than whatever he showed in 2024, which was easily the worst year of his career. It's nice to see that bounce back has maintained. He was okay down the stretch in summer, and that has carried over into what I would consider to be the best year of his career, right up there with 2023, where I really thought he was a good player. But you gotta shout out Feather as well here. I think Feather was very quietly, maybe not so quietly, in game number 3, like the main guy for ThunderTalk, the main character. He was just creating everything for this team, and when you're going to play around, you know, a Gwen Jinx late game with Skarner and Nautilus as good setup, you need that Nautilus to be very proactive, and you need to make sure that he's reading the map well, and Feather did a fantastic job of that. He was just better than PP got in this series, and that's kind of what you need to be here in Group Ascend. You need to be better than a lot of these supports, or, you know, players in your position at all, that are going to be more consistent. And PP God's obviously a great player. Feather, I think, did a great job going into that. Satab is the final player that I really want to shout out in a majorly positive way because he was exceptionally good in this series. And that's not always the case for Satab. It's funny because I think his wins are really solid. When he is able to get a lead and actually like push into the mid game, he can be in a relatively good position. I think this matchup is quite bad for Ninjas in Pyjamas because of that, because Doenby kind of allows his opposing mid laners to do really well because he's more so willing to get out on the map and not play super aggressive in the 1v1. That's kind of mostly what he is known for, and so it allows the enemy mid laner to also generate resources, and that is, of course, where Satab is at his best. Now, we've seen that Satab really struggles when he's behind him resources and isn't very good at acquiring those resources unless he's given them, but if he is given those resources, he's going to be in a fine spot. So, Beishwan, Satab, Feather, definitely the standouts. Hoya and 1xN were certainly not bad. 1xN was definitely fine, but I think a lot of the rest of the team did more of the heavy lifting here, but for Ninjas in Pyjamas on the other side, the clear negatives are clear. Aki, once again, just a really bad series back-to-back here in terms of the bad series coming off of day number 4. He's going to get done of the series, and it's really frustrating to watch Aki have good showings and have good moments, especially early on in games, and not be able to translate that into anything more as we continue on throughout a series, and then really kind of lose his luster down the stretch. We saw the Nefiri work out for him earlier on in the week, even if it was just from a selfish individual perspective, but it did not work out here in game number 2, and then game 3 was also just kind of a disaster from him. Everything going wrong, losing tempo super early on in a lot of these games. Like the Sejuani completely countered the Nefiri, and that's not supposed to happen in that matchup. I'm just so out on Aki at this point, which is frustrating because there was a time where I was in on him. It's just not been there the last 2 years. He'll have moments, but it's certainly not consistent. But I think an underratedly bad part of this team was Doenby in the mid lane, who had a really bad series, all things considered. He got blasted in game number 3 on Corki. This is genuinely one of the worst mid lane games I've seen in a while, and Doenby has some of the other mid lane games that I've seen that are absolutely horrendous. It's just, when this guy loses, he still does lose incredibly hard. You kind of point out that that's just part of the playstyle, and it's certainly part of the identity for Ninjas in Pyjamas, but it's not good. Like, it's not something that I'm not going to call out and, you know, point at in a negative way. when this mid-jungle duo isn't clicking, that's a problem. They don't really have a lot of other ways to win these games. And so, Aki and Doinb not playing well. PP definitely got outplayed by Feather as the support on the other side. It's just not a great look. Leave was awful in Game 2 on the Misfortune. People on Reddit will blame it on the champion. We have seen 8,000 good Misfortune games over the course of this split. You're a psychopath if you put this on Misfortune. Leave just did not play well, and he's not really suited to that style. Shanji continues to somehow be one of the more consistent pieces for NIP across this week. He has been atrocious so far this year, and so to see him probably be the best player for them in week 3 when they had so many games is very funny and very interesting, but it just doesn't matter. He certainly isn't going to be the player to drag this team across the finish line. You need more out of the middle of the map, out of jungle mid, and right now that's just not happening. NIP take 1 step forward, 2 steps back when it comes to their position this week, but this is a nice win for Thunder Talk. Does it really change my outlook for the team? Not so much. I don't have a feeling this is going to be repeatable for them. This is mostly NIP kind of losing rather than Thunder Talk winning. I just don't really have a ton of confidence that this team is going to overperform what they've been so far, and even with this really nice win, we'll have to see a lot more before I start shooting them to the moon again. Then moving on to our second series of day number 5, and it's another top-of-the-table clash as we get a lot of in-group ascend. It's Invictus Gaming taking on JD Gaming, and Invictus is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. JDG have a huge collapse across this week, although people might be saddened to hear that I don't really think this is all that bad for JDG. The first series that they lost definitely was. This one is much more excusable. I think they played fine here today. I just don't think they had the 2 best players on the Rift, which, yes, is a bit of a concern, but I really don't have that many major issues with JDG and how they played today. Game 2 was awesome, and they should have won game number 3, but Invictus really stepping up in some areas and really not stepping up in others. It's funny because it was kind of flipped this series, where JDG felt like an aggressive team that kind of had a bunch of good players but couldn't really put it all together, and IG felt like the team that had the top-end talent that JDG is claimed to have all split long, just didn't have the consistency across the board, and yet IG was still able to walk out of this series with a win. It's really funny in that regard, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me kind of has to go to Jeje in the jungle. I considered Rookie for this. It should be one of those 2. If it's not one of those 2, you're out of your mind. Although, let me tell you, I considered Paze on the other side because Paze is insane. This guy right now feels trapped on JDG, and that's not because JDG isn't a good team, just because I think Paze deserves to be on the best team in the world with the way that he's playing at the current moment. But Jeje was insane. He was absolutely tremendous in Game 1 on the Lilia, but it really came to light in Game 3 on the Jax. I'm not going to say he solo won that game because that would be a discredit to what Rookie was doing on the Ahri, but really this was a Jeje performance on the Jax where he was able to completely pull the rest of JDG apart and make gigantic impacts in the back half of the game. That's with his top laner and his support actively trying to lose him the game as hard as possible. It's really, really impressive stuff, and quite frankly, Jeje is putting together a sneakily great MVP conversation right now. I don't think he's leading it by any means. I think that there are other players I would definitely consider for that right now. Kanavi, as you guys know, is at the top of the list for me, but Jeje is certainly close, and I think he would be pretty, it would be pretty normal for him to end this split with the way that he has started as the number 2 or number 3 vote for MVP in a lot of cases, and I'm really, really happy to see that because Jeje did have some question marks coming into the year. He has answered all of those. He's the best player on this team, and I don't even feel all that, crazy saying that. I don't even think it's close. I don't think there's anyone else in the conversation for IG right now. He is the best player on the team. And then Rookie was the other player who really stepped up. Again, it's really felt like he's found his groove over the past couple of weeks. He stopped playing a lot of these melee assassins. He's not playing Yone. He's not playing Silas. He's not playing these champions, Aurora. He's not really playing these champions anymore. He's going back to Azir. He's going back to Ahri. He's going back to Ryze. Play the stuff you really won on 10 years ago. It turns out he's still really good at those champions, and Rookie was essential down the stretch in game number 3. Again, I kind of considered giving him player of the series, but I certainly thought Jeje was just a little bit better. But that's not everything for Invictus, because you got to talk about the bad. That's part of the story here with them. Dud of the series is actually going to stay on the winning side, and it's going to go to the Shy in the top lane. I'm starting to be like, this is the Shy I remember. I was getting concerned in the winter split when he was playing fine, but not necessarily dominating, nor was he running it down. Now we are getting the Shy back, where he's going to have some tremendously good laning phases, and he's going to be able to generate big leads, and then he's going to throw everything away in the later part of the game because his decision-making is actually horrible. Like, it is worst in the league type of bad. In the back half of these games. His Jace in game 1, exceptional, and 9, I think, of his 13 kills in this series came from that game number 1. He absolutely attempted to lose the rest of this series. The Rumble game was unplayable. He got absolutely trounced by Ala on the other side and just by all of JDG. And then the Renekton, like, I never want to see him play this champ again. I know we can play it, but like, I'm going to be left with such an emotional scar from this Renekton game number 3. It really was that bad. I just don't really know what else to say when it comes to the Shy. He has no clue what to do in the back half of the game, and this has gotten worse, I would say, since he left. He was always a player that was feast or famine, but typically speaking, you know, the last couple slots he's had on like Weibo Gaming and the last stint he was on Invictus for, like the last year of that, the problem was that he would be super feast or famine 1v1 in lane. He would get ganked really consistently and he wouldn't be able to respond to that. Now, he's his own problem in the back half of games, stepping up with no vision without the rest of his team and just dying. Genuinely, it feels like win trading at times. That's how bad his positioning is. I don't even really know what to say. He's got to figure it out. And it's not just him. Mako has those moments as well, and it makes me think the communication on this team is actually just completely broken, like unfixably broken, because Mako is a very good communicator who's never been like this throughout the entirety of his career. Even when he's had his problems, they've not been these kinds of problems where he's just completely disconnected from everybody else on the map. Here we are, like Mako having another horrible series. He's had quite a few of these over the course of this year, and it just gets tiring. Even Gala is not really playing all that well. This was a two-man show for Invictus with Jeje and Rookie, and they're going to be very lucky to walk out of this with a win, but I think JDG is going to feel kind of hard done that they didn't walk out of this with a win, because I think they played fine throughout a majority of this series. Now, there are a ton of criticisms for game number 3, and I think they definitely should have played that out better in the back half. You can't be Galio, Ornn, you know, Zeri, like front to back, protect the AD carry, protect the hyper carry, and get completely pulled apart in the way that they did. Their macro game was simply just not good enough, but there were so many times where it was like, JDG's playing better right now. They're a better team. They are more complete. They are enabling their superstar in the bot lane, and everything felt like it was coming together. They just couldn't close the book on it, which is definitely frustrating, but I think that there are still takeaways from that make me think, yeah, they had the right idea. They drafted the right comp, and they understand that Paze is the guy right now. It's not Scout, it's not Shun, it's certainly not Ala on the top side. Let him play something like Ornn weak side. Don't force him into a matchup that he has to win in lane. Don't force Shun to be able to skirmish all the time, although Xin Zhao certainly can. Let's get Paze on Zeri, and let's let him take over because he's super good at this champ. He's the best Zeri player in the world. I don't even think that's all that debatable, and just didn't work out. He was incredible in game 2 on the Ashe, as was everybody on JD Gaming. They were all really great in game 2. And honestly, I think you could make a case that for game number 3, if you just totaled the grades for each player across the board, JDG's would be higher. I think their players on average played better than the average of Invictus players. It's just unfortunate that, again, IG had the two best players on the Rift in Jeje and Rookie, and that meant that JDG ended up losing the game. It is just one of those series. I think I could be more critical, and I'm sure people in the comments will be more critical of JDG. I just can't really bring myself to do that, even if Scout and Missing and Ala certainly could have done more. I think Paze continues to be excellent, easily the best AD carry in the LPL in terms of production. Shun, I think, has been very good for this team. It just isn't coming together. I think their fortunes will turn, and I think this week is going to be looked at as more of an outlier. But for Invictus, I just have no idea what to think about this team. Somehow I'm walking out of a win for them over JD Gaming, a top 3 team in my power rankings, and I'm thinking worse of them. It's just ridiculous. I have no clue where this team ends up landing, and with their loss earlier this week and the inconsistency here, it just feels like we're going to be on this teetering edge throughout the entirety of 2025, and quite frankly, I don't know why we expected anything else with this roster. Then moving on now to day number 6, and day 6 kicked off with another Group Nirvana matchup. We get to go back down between OMG and Edward Gaming, where EDG is going to pick up the 2-0 win, and that's with OMG making a roster substitution that people are very concerned about, because this is not a good look. If this team felt confident in where they were, they would not make this change, and even though this team definitely does need to make some changes, they are not in a comfortable spot, they are not secure in any way. This is certainly not the change that I think a lot of people wanted to see going into this, final stretch here, quite frankly, for them to try and get themselves out of it with a new mid laner. Of course, Linfang is out, Charlotte is in the mid lane. Linfang, one of the only players who's produced at all for OMG. Has he been consistent? No, he's actually been pretty bad in Group Nirvana so far in their limited amount of games in Group Nirvana, but to say that he was the problem is crazy, considering what the top side of the map looks like for OMG, and EDG definitely took advantage of that in this series, which you can see in terms of the KDAs on the other side. So let's go ahead and talk about it. player of the series is very obviously going to go to Xiao Hao. You don't need me to hype up Xiao Hao. I'm still on the Xiao Hao train. I know I was really pounding the drum in 2022 and 2023, even, at the beginning of 2024. I really was the guy that was like, please, some major team, pick this guy up and try to get into, the top 8 or whatever, because I do think he can be the kind of player that can perform in that kind of situation. Unfortunately, his career has not necessarily worked out like that. However, I do think he can still be a very productive player for a team like EDG, and I think this is what we've seen to be kind of the perfect situation for him on a good, not great team, a team that's going to be around number 10 or 11 in the power rankings for most people, and let him be the number 1 guy on those teams. It doesn't feel like he's going to be a guy that ever breaks through into that top 6 or 7, although he's never really been on a team that's been given a real shot. Like that Weibo Gaming team, it was accompanied by ZDZ, obviously, in the top lane, who was disastrous, and they had plenty of problems. He ends up getting replaced by Tarzan, who's like the best jungler in the world, and of course things end up turning around. But Xiao Hao, that's like his only top level example and experience, and I think I'm a bit frustrated by that, but he was still awesome here. Hang is a nightmare on the other side. He's been absolutely disastrous for OMG, and Xiao Hao definitely took advantage of it. But you got to point out ZDZ as well in the top lane. This is one of the few series that he's actually played well in throughout 2025. This guy has been a nightmare for LGD Gaming down at the bottom of the standings, let alone for any team that wants to try and compete, and even he can pull out good performances against Harry, who is unplayable. I know a lot of times I talk about the players who are like the worst players at this level. I think for me, it really boils down for OMG. They have 2 of like the bottom 5 to 6 players in the LPL in Harry and Hang, like regardless of position. And that makes it really hard for them to win games. When ZDZ is gapping your top laner, you're in a really bad spot, especially when he gets to do it on Mbessa of all things. And so it's just not really a good look. The Cho'Gath game was totally fine from him in game number 1 as well. It was the boys, like the duo that have been together for so long in ZDZ and Xiao Hao, that definitely stood out this series. I want to give a big shout out to Wink. He was really styling on it throughout this series. Some of those plays worked, some of them did not, but man, he was going out there and looking like a playmaker, and that's what I want to see. I want to see that level of aggressiveness with On here on EDG. And then, of course, Angel had a great series going into Charlotte, basically a free laning phase throughout a lot of this, because Charlotte does not look like an LPL caliber mid laner. I do not understand why they made this decision, but we can get into that now as we transition over to the OMG part of this. It's just a disaster. This has become, a front runner for the worst team in the LPL, and LNG is certainly putting up a good fight in that regard, but OMG is bad. Like in every aspect of the game, they are bad. They are not good early, they are not good mid, they are not good late, and it's because they don't have good laners and they don't have good macro, and so I don't know exactly how they're supposed to win these games, even though they have talent on this team. Starry is a genuinely good player, and it would be a travesty if he was one of the first players to be on the bench at the start of the year. You could say similar things, I guess, about Moham, although I think Moham has been pretty bad over the course of 2025, but Linfeng would have been in that conversation before he got replaced. Again, I want to, reiterate, I understand from a short-term perspective why you would make that decision, because the bad games on Linfeng do look kind of bad. He wasn't very good in the first couple weeks of Group Nirvana, but Charlotte is definitely worse. This is 1000% a downgrade, and you cannot afford to make this downgrade right now. The Talia, the Rise, they didn't work out. And then, of course, the top side of this map, like, that's the reason people are upset by this decision. Not entirely because they benched Linfeng, but because they didn't bench Harry and Hang, who have been awful. And I get it. Like, there's not easy upgrades in top and jungle right now. There aren't a lot of players out there that don't have LPL jobs that are good enough at those spots to play in the LPL. The problem is, if you have those two, you are immediately going to be one of the worst teams in the league. Hang's going to get dead of the series here because he got completely out-jungled by Xiao Hao. But man, did I want to give this to Harry, who was unplayably bad. Once again, if you're getting gapped by ZDZ, there's no recovery from that. Like, there's no way to get back. This guy is the worst top laner in the LPL, and it's not close. Like, I don't like Cube. I don't like even someone like Hoya on Thunder Talk. Like, all of those players have their own problems, and there are plenty others that I could bring up here, but Harry is significantly worse than all of them. He is, like, below LDL level in terms of how I've graded him out. He's gotten worse every single year. He was already a player I didn't believe in when he came up through the system, and every chance he's gotten worse. I just think you need to move on. This was the guy they brought in middle of last year and stayed with over the course of the offseason. It's terrible mismanagement, and this team in general has just been entirely run into the ground. They had a very interesting young core that overperformed at the end of summer last year that probably should have gotten into playoffs and just barely didn't, and they've torn it apart. Tianjin is teamless now. This was a guy who came in and saved OMG's year last year. Maybe he can do it again. I don't know. Throw anything at the wall at this point. Just find something, because as of now, this team cannot play in the LPL, and that means they are going to be done before summer split. And for LGD Gaming, they should be one of the better teams in Group Nirvana on paper. They're going to be up there with Ultra Prime in terms of, the consistency they're looking to find. It looks like LGD is going to be in that conversation conversation as well. Again, they just want to be top 2. They want to get the opportunity to play a best of 5, like a play-in series best of 5 for the playoffs to get their chance. I'm not saying that they're going to be super successful there, but they certainly have enough talent to be able to make something happen, and I'm really intrigued to see if they can continue to grow. Then moving on to our second series of day number 6, and it's another really funny WE series as we got them taking on Anyone's Legend, and Anyone's Legend is going to pick up the win, but again, it's a 2-1. WE is once again going to be able to take a game off of a team they have no business taking a game off of. They beat Top Esports, Bilibili, and Anyone's Legend in one game, all in 1 week. It's very funny. They're 0-5 with wins against some of the biggest teams in the LPL. It's just how things go around here. It really is a fiesta every single day here in the LPL, but a still fine series for AL. Very similar to how we talked about the series for Bilibili against WE earlier. Their wins were so dominant, and quite frankly, their loss was even less bad than Bilibili's was, that I can't even be frustrated. I'm excited that WE is putting up a fight. Cube was awesome in this series, had a couple of really great moments, but it just wasn't enough to get over the backs of AL, who once again played really well. You just have to give them a lot of credence. They found their strategy, they found what works, and it continues to be a positive for them. My only worry is that it will eventually fall off the wheels, but at least for now, it's looking great. We'll go ahead and talk about it here. Player of the series is once again going to go to Tarzan in the jungle. I don't know what you want me to say at this point that I haven't already said about Tarzan. This guy is just an absolute menace. He's a monster. He's super consistent. He plays every part of the game at a high level. The Vi was fine in game 1. It certainly was good. I'm not trying to downplay how good his Vi was, but it was the Nefiri game that he's getting player of the series for in game number 3. Don't give this guy Nefiri. Certainly don't leave it up if you're WE. That felt absolutely criminal from them. I get that Monkey probably wanted to play it on the other side, but don't give AL the reason to pick it in draft. It's absolutely ridiculous. Tarzan completely cooked on that champion, and, you know, I just don't think you can give Tarzan a champion that has inbuilt priority, that has inbuilt escape patterns, because he's going to play so greedy and so reckless and so aggressive that he's going to push you entirely off the map. He's better than you, and he knows it. Like, he is just unfair good. So credit to him. This comp is also ridiculous with Yorick and Aurora and even like a Ziggs bot, but Hope continues to be incredible as a secondary option for this team, although I don't think he would be the second player that I would shout out, regardless of his KDA, which was awesome this series. I gotta shout out Flandre on the top side. Cube was putting up a fight in this series. He certainly came to play here today, and Flandre definitely matched that. That Shen game in game 1, gorgeous stuff. You know, Cube, one game, actually gets a tank, and unfortunately for him, he's not able to survive because Flandre puts up a great fight, but overall, I just want to give credit to AL in general. Shanks is really fun to watch on things like Aurora. I really like when he gets the opportunity to dive backlines. I think that really helps out AL's production because Hope really likes these front-to-back fights, and, you know, obviously that's going to be helped out more by Aurora pushing that backline forward, and of course Tarzan really likes playing that as well. Flandre can kind of fit into whatever, but I think this team just complements each other in the best way possible. The only negative I have is that they were one of the teams greedy enough to pick Elise support, and once again, as we've seen almost every single time this champion is picked, it's greed, and it's hubris, and they lose. Like, Elise support at a major level must have like a 20% win rate. This thing is just not doing anything ever. Even when it succeeds, the team often loses the game because the goal of the champion is to get gold early, and it can't do anything in the late game. If you just stall it out, it's very funny, and once again, Elise losing a game that really had no business being lost, but it is what it is, right? Teams just have to, you know, be the one to say, I can do it. I'm actually the support who can win on Elise, and just be psychos in that regard, but AL ends up being able to survive and, you know, live to tell the tale with sub 30-minute wins and walk away with a 2-1 victory. And for WE, on the other side, again, it's just hard to be super critical of a team that had no expectations coming into Group Ascend that I thought was going to get rocked over and over again, that probably wasn't going to win a single game or anything like that. They come in here and they've taken games off of some of the best teams in the LPL. It's really fun stuff. Cube was awesome this series. This is the best he's ever played for WE, and it's not particularly close. This is the best he's probably played in the last 2 or 3 years. I can't remember a series where he actually stepped up and was a primary option like this. I was criticizing his weak side play, and while I do think that's been better in 2025. Like, the carry games have always looked worse for him. That was not the case here. The Rumble in game 2, exceptionally good. He was still good on the Gnar in game number 3. Like, Cube just had a great series, definitely stepped up. Unfortunately, the rest of this team didn't really have the same priority. Taiyun is going to get my dud of the series here, although I think it's a little bit unfair. He was just the player who had the least amount of things to do, the least amount to do in games 1 and 3. He was fine in game 2. In fact, he did well on the Corki, but everybody kind of played well in game 2. It was really hard to isolate isolate one individual player, that misfortune was doomed, like on site. In Game 3, Tarzan was absolutely obliterating Taiyun in those fights, and unfortunately that kind of was a big difference maker for WE. I think you could consider this for Karis in the mid lane, who I don't think played particularly well here. Monkey was out jungled, even if he did make quite a few good plays. Vampire was fine, I'm certainly not criticizing him, and again, Cube was excellent, but the storyline here should be that WE took games off of Top Esports, Bilibili, and AL in the same week. It's just ridiculous to see that that's even a possibility for them, and honestly, they might be a top 10 team, which is just ridiculous. They are one of the most fun teams to watch in the world, if only because the expectations and the bar were so low that when they do anything, it's super fun. So credit to WE and credit to AL for, being able to kind of remain on top here. I've had them at number 2 in my power rankings because Top Esports has looked so good. I'm not saying that anything is going to change in that moving into the power rankings at the end of this week, but it's nice to see AL still take care of business when they're given the chance. But that's going to bring us to our 7th and final day of LPL action here in week number 3, and we get to kick it off with the last series that I ended up commentating across this week. It was LNG Esports taking on Ultra Prime, and I'm glad I got to be there because I got to see LNG's first series win of 2025. This is a big one for them with a 2-0 sweep over Ultra Prime, and quite frankly, this was not close at any point. This was an absolute decimation of Ultra Prime by LNG, and this is not what anybody expected going into this week, especially coming out of the first couple of series. LNG looked hapless, LP looked like he couldn't play, 5t5 has been the worst jungler in the league, and Ultra Prime felt like a team that was really starting to find its form. Junhao was definitely someone you could play around and really try to play through, and it felt like Wako was playing better, Jung was playing better, Saber was playing better, Xiaoxia obviously came in and helped the team. It felt like everything was going better for Ultra Prime, and it all falls apart here as LNG find one last piece to be able to make one final push with, and it really works out. Xiaofang comes into the jungle as the starting jungler to replace 5t5, their third jungler already of 2025, their third jungler of the spring split already, and he comes in and dominates, absolutely decimates Ultra Prime and looks fantastic doing it. He is player of the series. It's not particularly close when you look at both games as a whole. I do want to point out both Zika and Haichao looking incredible in this series. I think both of them played great. Zika on the Jace in game number 2, and Haichao, of course, on both the Corki, but mostly the Aurora in game number 2, and then LP and Zhuo also surviving on the bottom side of the map is important, but Xiaofang was the main guy. He was the main character for the team here for LNG. And that's why they're able to come out with a win. He just completely out-jungled Junhao, and if he's going to be able to pick up things like Lilia and then carry on them, like actually just generate a ton of pressure in the mid-game, win every single fight, play super greedy macro-wise, and then go on something like Skarner in Game 2 and be the primary facilitator, like he showed everything we needed to see here in both of these games already. This is the best performance LNG has gotten from any player so far in 2025, let alone a jungler. This is better than Weiwei. This is better than 5t5. You need to stick with Xiaofang because I think he might actually be able to save your season. And it did matter because Zika was winning on the top side as he normally does, but now he had somebody to play off of, and all of a sudden that pressure in the jungle can translate to pressure in the mid lane where Haichao was winning 1v1, and everything starts to open up. Everything starts to get a little bit easier for LNG. The places that felt like small bright spots in an overwhelming sea of badness end up being a little bit more manageable when your jungle is actually doing something and has a ton of pressure and you can start getting objectives. That's when things start to go right. I do still have my concerns. I don't think LP is a very good player down in the bot lane. He did fine this series. He certainly survived, but I think he is eventually going to start holding this team back. Zhuo is obviously not a very good support. I think having a bad bot lane is really not ideal, but if Haichao can just not be bad, if he's been bad all of 2025, if he can start opening up now that his jungler is going to start having priority, and if Zika obviously can still be one of the better top laners in the league, you've got something here for LNG. You've got something you can build off of. I'm not willing to crown them or anything just yet, but this is the kind of win you need to get in order to make sure that you're not in the bottom 2. Now, LNG very well could still be in the bottom 2 depending on the rest of the results of Group Nirvana. They certainly set themselves up to be in a bad spot, but winning over Ultra Prime is actually massive for them, and if they can carry that momentum, it's big. And then for Ultra Prime, these are the kinds of losses you absolutely cannot take if you are trying to get top 2 or even really trying to stay out of bottom 2. Now, I'm not trying to say that Ultra Prime is in danger because I do think there are 2 teams that are definitely worse than them outside of LNG in OMG and RNG that would probably take that spot over Ultra Prime. However, this was a team that came in here probably thinking, oh, I should have been in Group Ascend. Like, we went 2-2 against WE in the last chance qualifier and just lost to them in the best of 3 at the end of the day, even though we beat them earlier on in the same tournament. It's It's super frustrating, but we should be the best team in Group Nirvana, or at the very least a team that can get top 2 and compete for one of those play-in spots. And now that gets thrown into chaos because LGD and LGD Gaming have both looked totally fine at this level, and Ultra Prime with a slip-up like this is the kind of stuff you just cannot do. And they played bad. Junhao's gonna get done of the series. Did he do anything across these 2 games? 2 priority playmakers, one on the one game on Lee Sin, one game on Xin Zhao, and both games he was super slow and was really scared to make any decisions. I'm not sure if it's because he didn't have a ton of time to scout for Xiaofeng, but it didn't look great. Jiang was definitely outplayed by Zika on the top side. Saber did nothing here. Xiaoxia had some horrible engages. Wako was the only player not completely running it the entire game, but it didn't matter. Like, Ultra Prime is not good when they play like this. If Junhao's not going to be able to establish that jungle pressure and be able to create from that position, is this team even playable? Are they anything but a bottom 2 team? That's kind of what we saw in the winter split when Junhao was playing bad, and so this is kind of a sober awakening here for Ultra Prime. They have to play better than this, and they have to be able to move on being a lot more aggressive, but this is gigantic for LNG. It does reestablish their ability to potentially survive. They've been number 16 in my power rankings basically the entirety of the spring split. Ever since WE started stepping up, LNG has kind of owned that bottom spot, and this is really the first time they've had any sort of glimpse of life. Remember, this is their first best of win in all of 2025, including both winter and spring. They didn't win a game in the best of 1 stage of the placements here, and they haven't won a game yet in Group Nirvana. Everything has been going horrible for LNG, but this finally feels like a chance for them to see the light at the end of the tunnel for some of these players to survive, and they've got to latch onto it, and they've got to be able to carry this momentum over. And then moving on to our second series of the final day, and it's time to go back to Group Ascend to close out week number 3 as we got Bilibili Gaming taking on Top Esports. And to the chagrin of every single LPL fan, Top Esports has picked up a 2-1 series win here. People hate this team, and I do understand why people hate this team. They are the villains of the LPL right now, but they are the villains that are succeeding at this very moment because this team looks dominant when they step up and play their own individual game. BLG absolutely showed up here today. They decimated Top Esports in game number 1. They looked fantastic throughout most of the rest of this series. It didn't matter though, because TES was better, and they're better in the most important role in the game right now, which is jungle. And that's been the problem for Bilibili, and it will continue to be the problem for Bilibili. That way simply isn't good enough for this team to try to compete for being top 2 or top 3 at the current moment. Top 3 is doable. Top 3 is open. Top 2 really feel like the spots that don't feel very touchable if you don't have a complete roster at the moment, and unfortunately that is the case for Bilibili. But we made all this fuss about Top Esports dropping a game to WE, and then they go and drop a game, or Bilibili drops a game to them, and then Anyone's Legend drops a game to them. It's a great week for WE, but Top Esports is still the team to beat right now in the LPL, and I think they reproved that. And I'm not going to stop being quiet, or I'm not going to start being quiet about Kanavi. I'm not going to stop talking about how good this guy has been. He's going to get yet another player of the series. Quite frankly, this guy's running away with MVP. I don't even think it's particularly close. It would take a pretty big miracle effort from almost anybody else in the LPL to win the MVP of the spring split, and we're only 3 weeks in. I get that we still have a lot of games to go, but Kanavi really has been that good in the quote-unquote regular season, the entirety of this spring split. Up until this point, there's not really been a lot that I can point to him. There's one bad series that he had, and outside of that, everything looks fantastic from him. I still think Kanavi is the guy right now in the LPL, and whether it's on, Skarner in game number 2 or Pantheon in game number 3, he ran both games. He was definitely the most valuable player for Top Esports in both of their wins, and you got to give him credit for that. I do want to shout out Jackie Love and Crisp, who I think had a really good week, all things considered. I don't think they were dominant in the way that maybe you would want them to be, but they were really stable, and I think that that's very encouraging. Jackie Love, in particular, had a really good week, and I want to give him a big shout out. Crisp can still be pretty hit or miss, but I think he's gotten a little bit better throughout the last couple of weeks. You're always going to get that with Crisp. Again, he's the biggest playmaker in the entire world in terms of the angles that he sees. It just doesn't always go right with him. So, it is what it is. Cream was not as good as he was in the playoff series against Bilibili, that's for damn sure, but he did enough to be able to let his team win. He certainly didn't get trounced by Knight throughout the back half, only in game number 1, but I continue to be really high on 369. I think people were kind of talking about Bin coming in here and making a statement, kind of reinserting himself. 369 was just as good as Bin, although Bin maybe was a little bit better. Certainly was very good for Bilibili. I'm not going to try and sit here and criticize his performance too much, but I do want to praise 369 for not really being a hindrance to his team at all, except for a couple of plays here or there. But Kanavi continues to be the priority piece for Top Esports, the MVP frontrunner, and it's really getting them across the finish line right now. And for Bilibili, it's the opposite. Their jungle position is holding them back. Full stop, end of story. where you could say the same thing about support right now with On, but I think a lot of the problems I have with On's game are just that he's not even trying to play with Wei, and I think it's making this team look worse. Wei's going to get done of the series, and I'm going to dig my feet in. I'm going to like put my head in the sand and just say what I think over and over again because it continues to prove itself right. Sticking with Wei for this team moving into 2025 is going to cost them a full year of being able to win the World Championship. Now, maybe they figure it out. Maybe everything comes together, and they were good in 2024. I get why the tape would make you feel like this is the right decision last year going into this year, but it's just not been. Wei has been a disaster for this team in terms of what the expectations were. Me being low on him as a player has turned out to be very correct. Quite frankly, I honestly wasn't low enough on what Wei was as a player coming into the year. He's just not what he should be. Kanavi completely out-jungled him in the back half of this series. Go watch that Sejuani game in game 2. That was horrendous. You're telling me that guy's on a top 5 team in the LPL? It's just not acceptable. I'm not a fan of Wei, and I'm not a fan of this team because they play too much around Wei, and it continues to be a problem. And it sucks because the solo laners were awesome here. Bin was really good, one of his better series of the split up until this point. Knight is a menace. The dude is absolutely unfair. Cream was really good into Knight in their playoff series in the winter split. Throw that out the window, man. Knight's going to step up when he needs to. That Sylas game was unstoppable in game number 1. Not that the rest of the team also didn't play well, but the Yone and the Annie were also fine throughout the rest of this series. If he had more agency on these champions, perhaps something actually happens, but it just doesn't. On makes some mistakes. He steps up a little bit too far forward. I think it's fair to point out his game 3 on the Alistar as not being great. Elk, I don't think has performed like the best AD carry in the world like he was last year. Like, there are concerns elsewhere on BLG, but I think the core problem stems from their jungle not having pressure and not connecting with the rest of this team, and it's holding them back. Pardon if I'm singling out one player a little bit too much when it comes to this negative review, but I really do think this all stems back to Wei in the jungle, and I think it's not going to get better. It's why I put them at number 5, and it's why I continue to have them there. But for Top Esports, this is a big win. It shows that, you know, their low moments are just going to be blown out of proportion because they were against bad teams, and people want Top Esports to fail, but this is still the team to beat in the LPL, regardless of what a lot of people want to say. But moving on to our final series of the week here, and we get another really fun outcome. It's FunPlus Phoenix taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas, and FPX is going to pick up the 2-0 win, and they're not just going to win, they're going to decimate this series, and Doenb actually did play well. Typically speaking, when you're talking about NIP getting blown off the map, it's Doenb just not having a particularly good series, but FPX is starting to feel like a shockingly complete team with a shocking amount of answers to a lot of the questions we were worried about. A lot of these players are really starting to step up, and I'm getting a little bit excited about what could be the future for them. Is this not the performance of a top 6 or 7 team in the LPL? Quite frankly, I feel better about them right now than I did last year with Milky Way, with Dekdom, with Life. I feel like this team is playing in a more complete and more repeatable way, and I do think they have some top-end talent. I don't think they really downgraded in terms of roster from last year, so we can go over it, but I'm really pumped for this FPX team because they had a phenomenal week. Player of the series is going to go to Shadow in the jungle. Obviously, Aki has put up basically no fight against anybody throughout this week, with the exception of Invictus Gaming, where he did actually play pretty well, all things considered. There are some criticisms, but Shadow once again just coming out here and looking fantastic. Ever since that final game of the placement stage where he played against Ninjas in Pyjamas, funnily enough, and he absolutely decimated this team, ended up getting, what, like 16, 17 kills, something like that, just absolutely popping off. He has carried that momentum over and has become the Shadow that we kind of all remember. It's funny because NIP was the team he was last super successful on before coming over here to FPX. It definitely took him some time to feel comfortable, but he's been great over the past couple of weeks, and he has been a huge reason why this team has found a ton of consistent success. He's not the only reason, but he's a big reason. Care went 12-0-30 in this series against Doenb, who was playing well. I want to make that abundantly clear. Doenb was doing everything he should be doing, but you look at that game number 2, you look at Shadow on the Pantheon, you look at Care on the Talia, and you look at Jue on the Poppy, and it's just unplayable for Ninjas in Pyjamas if they go out there and perform, and that's exactly what they did. So credit to Care. This is absolutely ridiculous. I didn't think he had this in him. I was a big Care supporter in 2023 when it felt like he was starting to figure some things out and, you know, put together a quietly pretty good split, but he was not good last year, and I didn't think he was all that great at the beginning of the year. I was getting ready to kind of give up on Care and call him a player that never really reached that potential that we kind of saw for him, but I don't know, maybe it's clicking now that everything else is working. Sheer is just incredible on the top side. The fact that JDG let this guy go is actually really biting them in the ass. He should be playing for an upper tier team, and FPX is reaping the benefits from it. And Jue, talk about a player that I'm super excited for. Jue has been unreal kinds of good for this team. He completely gapped PP God in this series. It wasn't even remotely close, but even outside of that, he's been good basically the entire split for FPX, and he's shown a ton of flashes previously when he was playing specifically for Ultra Prime in the spring split last year. It really felt like a lot was going right for him as a player. I'm super excited to see what the future for Jue looks like. I think he could be a top support in this league for a long time, and he was one of the best players in the entirety of the LPL across week number 3. Assume was there too. Definitely the part of the puzzle that I am the least hyped about, we'll just say, but overall, FPX just dominated across the board. You can't really point out one individual player that underwhelmed in this series. When you win by this much, it's usually a team effort. But for Ninjas in Pyjamas on the other side, they just don't really have that same kind of firepower. They don't have that same consistency. First of all, their jungle got obliterated once again, but really, it was their bot lane. This was the worst performance I have seen out of Leave and PP God as a duo. And Leave obviously will have these games. PP God will have these games. They had them individually, but together they had really been a lot more stable. That was not the case at all in this series. Both of them deserve dud of the series. I seriously want to give it to both. This is the worst Leave has looked by far since entering this team, but I'm giving it to PP God because I think the gap between Jue and PP God was more noticeable than the gap between Assume and Leave, because I don't think Assume was quite as dominant as Jue was. Now, again, just give it to whoever you want, but both of them were absolutely horrendous in this series and need to play better. Aki continues to get out jungled. Shanji had no chance of being able to go up against Sheer, who was better than him by a lot on the top side, and Doenby, while he was trying his best, was still out-roamed and out-macroed by Care on the other side of this same matchup. This is not a good look for Ninjas in Pyjamas. This was a team that looked so promising at the start of this week and blew it all away after 3 really bad series. This is a horrible way to keep your momentum up, and quite frankly, I'm super concerned about this team. Now, that being said, I think there is a world where they're basically exactly the same as they were last split, where they super underwhelmed in Group Ascend, couldn't buy any sort of wins, and then randomly end up making playoffs because they win one series to get in and figure it out there. I think that that's possible for Ninjas in Pyjamas. I'm just not projecting that right now. I'm really low on this team, and I'm starting to get higher on FPX. Is NIP a bottom, 9 team? Are they a bottom 2 team in Group Ascent? It's possible. Is FPX better than them? It's possible. I don't know how I'm going to adjust my power rankings because I still think there is a lot up in the air for a lot of these teams, but at least for now, a lot of confidence shifted in terms of how this result went, and I'm really excited to say that. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL week number 3 overview and analysis video in the spring. Split up on the screen the standings after 3 weeks of action in both Group Ascend and Group Nirvana. Of course, any ties are just broken alphabetically. I only have to say that for 2 more remaining teams. We're really starting to get into the thick of things when it comes to game scores, so I'm excited for that. But you can see to the right of every single team my personal power rankings, where I, power rank these teams from number 1 to number 16. We can go over risers and fallers, but you guys are already yelling at me in the comment section. I already know it because I'm holding off from making a lot of changes after this week. There were some crazy upsets. FPX looked amazing. LGD Gaming didn't. They looked pretty bad, quite frankly. Invictus had some ups and downs, mostly downs, and Ninjas in Pyjamas was really bad for a majority of the week, but actually beat Invictus Gaming. It's really hard to get a read on any of these teams right now, and so I'm just taking my foot off the gas for a week. I'm taking a mulligan. I'm saying we'll see what happens in week number 4. Hopefully that starts to illuminate where these teams are a bit more. I'm going to be on a razor's edge. I guarantee that it won't be unmoving unless it's deserved to be unmoving by the end of next week. What I'm saying is that week 4 will kind of illuminate where I actually have a lot of these, teams right now, but it's just so hard to get an idea of where Group Ascend is because everybody's beating each other, and so a circle of suck just leads to me being a little bit more hesitant to make any changes at the moment, but I am making some. First of all, Weibo is going to leapfrog Ninjas in Pyjamas to go back into 6th, and NIP will go to 7. I just do not trust this team right now. Quite frankly, in terms of results this week, NIP should be down at number 9, and Invictus should be right down there with them at number 8, with teams like FunPlus and Thunder Talk above them, but I just can't reasonably do that because those teams aren't very good. They're solid, they're interesting, but they're not elite, and I wouldn't project them to be better moving forward unless they suddenly are, which obviously we will see moving forward, but WE is going to jump into the top 10. They're going to move to number 10. They picked up wins over AI LPL, Top Esports, and Bilibili Gaming this week. Some of the best teams in the LPL. That's pretty nice, considering the fact that they're 0-5 in terms of series score. They'll take what they can get, but they've at least shown some fire, which I think is interesting. And then in Group Nirvana, we actually do have a ton of changes. This is where they all kind of were hiding. LGD and EDG are going to jump up to 11 and 12 respectively, because Ultra Prime is going to fall all the way down to 13. They were the top ranked team in Group Nirvana for me heading into the week. They are not the best team in Group Nirvana. The best team in Group Nirvana does not get absolutely obliterated by LNG. I don't care about the new jungler. I don't care about Xiaofeng being really good. Speaking of, LNG is going to jump out of those bottom 2 spots in my power rankings to number 14 for now. I'm taking a cautiously optimistic approach to the new jungle, and I think they will be able to survive, but that means RNG and OMG fall down 1 spot, and they are now in the danger zone. They are the 2 teams that right now I'm projecting are going to be the first 2 eliminated, and it's crazy. These are 2 of the most historic organizations in the LPL. RNG's been to World Finals. OMG was kind of one of the first teams to really break through in the LPL back when WE was running things for a long time, like 2012, 2013. It's crazy to see these 2 teams at the bottom, but just kind of is what it is right now. So let me know what you agree with or disagree with in terms of my power rankings down in the comment section below. Of course, I've made no changes. Let me know if you think that I should have made wholesale changes. I just want to be a bit more cautious in this particular instance, because there's just way too much up in the air, and it's a wait-and-see approach for me. I hope you can understand. But let's go ahead and move into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 3. Player of the week to me was very easy. It's going to go to Tarzan, the jungler for Anyone's Legend. That's back-to-back weeks with an AL player of the week. Last week, it was obviously Kale. This week, it is Tarzan. He was exceptionally good. Don't give him Neferi. It's pretty unfair when this guy gets that champion. WE in Game 3, Thunder Talk in Game 1. Both of those games were absolutely dominant from him. Who would have known? The jungler that I consider to be the best in the world right now getting the champion that I consider to be the strongest in its role. Who would have guessed that that would be a good combination? But also the Skarner game against Thunder Talk in Game 2. He just was super consistent throughout the week in their 2 series wins. But my honorable mentions, Jway, the support for FPX, was exceptional. In fact, he was in the running for Player of the Week. If Tarzan wasn't quite as good in both of his series, Jway probably would have gotten it in most weeks. That's how well he played for FPX. Definitely on the lookout for him to be able to keep that up, because he already showed flashes of this last year in his rookie year. And then 369, the top laner for Top Esports, he was probably the most consistent piece of that team when you look at both of their series. Even if I think you could theoretically give this to Kanavi, I think 369 was just a tad bit better. So 369 and Jway are my honorable mentions, and Tarzan is my player of the week. And then my dud of the week was a very, very simple choice. It's got to go to Aki, the jungler for Ninjas in Pyjamas. I don't care what happened against Invictus Gaming. I don't care that he played really well in a series that kind of got them an upset. He had some moments in that series that weren't particularly great, and in all of the other series, all 3 of their other losses this week, he was horrendous, and there's just no resume that kind of touches that in terms of players who were bad over the course of this week, although I think there are some that could be in the conversation. Karis, I think, was someone that kind of floated around in my head, but Aki ran away with this, and unfortunately, just kind of is the way that it is right now. He seems to be one of the more detrimental players in the LPL. That 2023 is a complete outlier. He's never going to hit those highs again, and that has become abundantly clear, and that is unfortunate for Ninjas in Pyjamas, but he's going to get my dud of the week, and Tarzan is going to get my player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we'll be covering the LPL every single week on this channel, as we always do, but we cover the 3 other major regions as well, so LTA North, LEC, and LCK, as well as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all